The handcuffs clicked too tight. Passengers at Gate C14 turned their heads, some in confusion, some in fear. A black man in a navy hoodie was face down on the airport carpet, a knee jammed between his shoulders. A child cried. A woman pulled out her phone. The officer didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and that was the point. If you're ready to hear a story that will make you think, feel, and rethink, click like, subscribe, and get comfortable. It's not just a story. It's a powerful call to truth that will leave a mark on your heartfelt memory forever. Officer Darren Holt had been patrolling Terminal 4 at Hartsfield-Jackson for over a decade. He prided himself on instinct. Good over guidelines, he liked to say. And today, his gut told him the man in the hoodie, who had dared to mutter, "Don't touch my bag," was a threat. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't run. But something about him, the calm, the confidence, felt like defiance. So Holt acted. It took seconds. He barked the command. The man asked, "What for?" Holt took that as resistance. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, shoved, and cuffed. The man didn't fight back. He just lay still, cheek to the floor, eyes staring into the carpet pattern like he'd seen it before. Then something changed. A voice came over the airport intercom. Calm. Professional. "Attention, Officer Darren Holt. Please report to Airport Security HQ immediately." Now, passengers looked up. Holt froze. His heart didn't race yet, but his brain did a kind of lurch. Security HQ? Why him? Why now? The man on the floor, still handcuffed, slowly turned his head. He didn't smirk. He didn't look scared. He looked sorry. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, quietly. And in that moment, Holt regretted everything. Officer Holt didn't answer. He didn't have one. His grip tightened reflexively, a habit of control. The voice over the intercom echoed again, only this time, it came with motion. Two airport police officers and a suited TSA supervisor emerged from the hallway near Gate C12. They were walking fast, purposeful, toward him. Passengers started recording. Holt stood up slowly, leaving the black man cuffed and kneeling on the terminal floor. His mind flipped through a Rolodex of excuses, suspicious behavior, noncompliance, verbal aggression. But none of it would hold. Not this time. Because he hadn't followed protocol. Because the man hadn't done anything. Because the cameras were rolling. And because deep down, Holt knew he hadn't cuffed a threat. He'd cuffed a presence. The man stood with some difficulty, the cuffs biting into his wrists. His eyes met Holt's. "You just made the worst assumption of your life," he said, with neither malice nor mockery, just truth. The TSA supervisor approached. Mid-50s. Black. Calm voice. "Officer Holt, step aside. You're being relieved." "On what grounds?" Holt asked, though the bravado had bled out of his voice. "On the grounds that the man you just handcuffed is not only cleared for federal travel but also happens to be Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Epps, here on DOJ business," the supervisor replied. "You didn't just detain a civilian. You just violated a federal officer's rights." Gasps rippled through the gate. A child's voice asked too loud, "Is that man going to jail?" But it wasn't clear who the child meant. Holt's hands, still on his belt, dropped. For the first time in years, Darren Holt felt fear, and it had nothing to do with danger. It was the fear of being seen for who he was, stripped of badge and benefit of doubt. Marcus Epps, still in cuffs, lifted his wrist slightly. "Take these off," he said. And Holt hesitated, because his instinct had never taught him what to do with regret. The cuffs came off with a metallic sigh, louder in the silence than any scream. Holt stepped back, hands trembling, trying to place them somewhere inconspicuous, his pockets, his hips, the small of his back. But there was no safe place for guilt. Marcus Epps flexed his wrists, the red welts already rising on his skin. He didn't rub them. He just looked up and said, "Is there somewhere we can talk?" "Privately." The TSA supervisor nodded. "We've prepared a room." A pair of officers flanked Holt, one of them gently but firmly guiding him by the arm. It wasn't an arrest. Not yet. But it wasn't a choice either. As they walked, Holt glanced sideways at Marcus, who was straightening his blazer. The man was unshaken, poised. That quiet dignity Holt had mistaken for arrogance now looked like armor. For a second, Holt saw the flash of his own reflection in the polished glass of a nearby display case, and he didn't recognize the man staring back. The room was small, sterile. Frosted windows. One table. No weapons allowed. The supervisor remained outside as Marcus took a seat. Holt stood. "You assumed I was a threat," Marcus said, voice low but heavy. "What did I do, Officer Holt, besides walk and breathe?" Holt swallowed hard. You were evasive. You didn't answer my command. No, Marcus corrected. I asked you a question. That's not evasion, that's a right. A beat passed. Marcus leaned forward. Do you know how many times I've given lectures on civil rights? On use of force? On implicit bias? He shook his head. I thought I was done being a case study. I was wrong. The shame hit Holt like cold water. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain that he'd had a long day, that the airport had issued alerts about heightened threats, that... Marcus raised a hand. Don't tell me about the day you had. Tell me about the person you saw when you looked at me. That's the only answer that matters. Outside the frosted glass, more officers were gathering. Phones buzzing. Reports being filed. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was misconduct. The DOJ would call it by its name. And inside that quiet room, Officer Holt, decorated, senior, once proud, felt something break loose inside him. Not his reputation. His denial. Airport security didn't need to wait for statements. The footage had already spread. Cell phones caught the arrest from 3 angles. Gate C14 security camera had a 4th. The DOJ had requested the full reel within 15 minutes of Marcus Epps' detainment. By the time Holt sat down again, a monitor in the conference room was already paused on a freeze frame, his hand pushing Marcus to the ground. Watch, Marcus said. His voice was calm, almost tired now. Let's both watch what actually happened. The video played. No sound, just images. There was Marcus standing near the gate, checking his phone. There was Holt walking over, one hand resting on his belt. There was the exchange, Marcus gesturing toward his carry-on, Holt stiffening. Then the takedown. Quick, unprovoked, brutal in its efficiency. Holt couldn't look away. Your report, Marcus said evenly, will say I was uncooperative, aggressive, maybe even threatening. But the footage doesn't lie. I asked you, what's the issue with my bag? And you escalated. Holt didn't answer. Marcus turned to face him fully. Do you know how many times I've watched videos like this? Black men forced to defend their humanity before defending their rights. But this time it's me. And I have the credentials to expose it. That word, credentials, hit Holt harder than any reprimand. Because it meant this time, the victim had proof, power, and position. And there'd be no sweeping it under the rug. A knock at the door. The TSA supervisor entered with a clipboard. The Department of Justice is en route, he said. They're sending someone from Internal Affairs. Holt nodded numbly. Until then, the supervisor added, you're on suspension. Effective immediately. The badge on Holt's chest suddenly felt too heavy. He reached up and removed it slowly, placing it on the table. For years, he'd told himself he was part of the solution, that he followed the law, that he saw things others didn't. But the footage made it clear he hadn't seen a man. He'd seen a target. And now the whole country would see him. They brought in a federal investigator within the hour. Agent Naomi Rivas, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper questions. Her presence turned the quiet room into a tribunal. She didn't yell. She didn't posture. She simply opened a leather folder, laid it flat on the table, and said, let's talk about your record, Officer Holt. Holt sat upright, shoulders stiff, as if posture could shield a legacy. Rivas flipped through the first page. 12 commendations. 3-4 quick action under ambiguous circumstances. Flip. 5 use of force complaints. All dismissed internally. One involved a 17-year-old boy at a bus terminal. Sound familiar? Silence. Marcus, seated across from Holt, didn't speak. He didn't need to. Rivas continued. There's a pattern here, Officer Holt. You act fast, and the people you act against tend to have one thing in common. Want to guess what that is? Holt shifted in his seat. His throat was dry. I didn't profile anyone. I act on behavior. Behavior, Rivas repeated. Like checking a phone? Carrying a bag? Existing. Holt flinched. Outside, the airport moved on. Flights boarded. Children cried. Wheels rolled across tile. But inside that room, time had shrunk to a single reckoning. Holt wasn't the one writing the report anymore. He was the subject of it. Rivas reached the final page. Do you know what Mr. Epps does for the Department of Justice? Holt blinked. He oversees federal accountability investigations, specifically into police misconduct. It landed like a stone. Marcus finally spoke. I wasn't just a man at Gate C14. I was your audit. And you failed. Holt bowed his head, not out of deference, out of something worse. Recognition. He had cuffed a man sent to clean up the very mess Holt had spent years denying existed. And now that man had a front-row seat to his undoing. By the next morning, the footage had aired on 3 national networks. The words racial profiling, abuse of power, and federal violation circled the internet like vultures. But back inside the Justice Department's Atlanta office, the mood wasn't outrage. It was preparation. Marcus Epps stood at the window, watching rain strike the glass. Behind him, a junior analyst stepped lightly into the room. "They're spinning it," she said. The police union issued a statement calling it a miscommunication under stress. "They're trying to reframe you as a provocateur." Marcus didn't turn around. Of course they are. He finally did turn, walking to his desk where a folder sat open. Not about Holt, about the system that made Holt possible. "They're not protecting him," Marcus said, flipping through names. "They're protecting what he represents. The doctrine of suspicion, the worship of instinct, the immunity of the badge." He paused on one file. A complaint from 2016. Dismissed. No body cam. Victim, a black teenager. Location, same precinct. Pattern, he whispered. Outside, the city rumbled as if it knew something was shifting. A tension in the clouds. A reckoning in the air. Back at the airport, Officer Holt sat alone in a makeshift interview room. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't holding anything. No badge. No weapon. Just silence. A representative from the Civil Liberties Union had requested to observe. The DOJ was pushing for charges, and a journalist from a national paper was now digging into his record. When asked if he had anything to say in his defense, Holt whispered, "I thought I was keeping people safe." The investigator asked, "Safe from what? From who?" Holt didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because in that silence was the truth. He wasn't afraid of Marcus Epps. He was afraid of the story Marcus might tell, and who might finally believe it. The podium was small. The microphones too many. They fed on every word like scavengers at a feast. Marcus Epps stood tall, not in vengeance, but in principle. Behind him, a banner read, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. To his left stood Agent Rivas. To his right, a black mother whose son's name had once appeared in a complaint that vanished. "I wasn't cuffed because I broke the law," Marcus said into the cameras. "I was cuffed because I made Officer Holt uncomfortable." A hush fell over the crowd of reporters, even the cynical ones who'd seen 100 scandals come and go. There was something different about Marcus, not just the eloquence, but the precision. He spoke like a man who had built a life on holding systems accountable and had just become their latest casualty. "He didn't see my badge," Marcus continued. "He didn't see my federal credentials. He didn't even see my eyes. He saw my skin and made a decision." Somewhere in the back, a reporter raised his hand. "Mr. Epps, are you calling this racism?" Marcus paused, the question hanging like a guillotine. "I'm calling it what it is," he said. A conditioned response rooted in fear, upheld by policy, and excused by silence. If that's not racism, then the word has no meaning. Flashbulbs erupted. The mother beside him took his hand. Her son, she whispered, had been arrested 3 years ago. Wrong person. Charges dropped. But he never forgot the cuffs, or the way the officer looked at him. That officer had also been Holt. Marcus turned to her. "Your son matters now," he said quietly. He should have mattered then. And that was the power of the press conference, not just policy or outrage, but presence. Marcus Epps didn't speak like a man who wanted justice for himself. He spoke like a man who intended to change who justice belonged to. Behind the polished oak doors of the police union's Atlanta office, the mood had curdled into panic. The press conference had shattered the wall they'd built over years, carefully curated press statements, quiet settlements, legal sleight of hand. None of that would work now, because Marcus Epps wasn't just any federal officer. He was the one person whose words turned whispers into subpoenas. Seated at the head of the conference table, Union President Walt Greeley rubbed his temples. "We need a strategy," he muttered. Across from him, the department's legal counsel shuffled a stack of papers. "He's not suing yet, but he's pushing for federal charges and departmental review." Greeley sneered. "Review means exposure. Exposure means risk." Then came the quieter truth. And Holt's not helping. He's not apologizing. He's shutting down. If he breaks under pressure, the whole timeline becomes suspect. One of the captains leaned forward. "Then we float the mental health angle. Say he was under stress. Family problems. Isolated incident." Another voice, younger and sharper. "Won't work. Epps already hinted at systemic failure. If we make this about one man, he'll make it about all of us." Greeley stood. Then it's time we make a call. The room went still. To who? The attorney asked. Greeley didn't answer. He just walked into his office and shut the door. Moments later, a secured line lit green on his desk phone. He picked it up. Yes, he said. We've got a problem. And you need to contain it before it starts naming names. No one said cover up. No one had to. Because in rooms like this, power didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to whisper in time. The email hit inboxes at 2:17 a.m. Subject line. A pattern Officer Holt can't deny. No name. No signature. Just attachments, 6 internal memos, 4 redacted reports, and 1 chilling photograph. By morning, the files were everywhere. A 2017 complaint. Black father detained with his 8-year-old daughter outside a shopping mall. Dismissed. No footage. A 2019 incident. 23-year-old engineering student, cuffed at a train station, held for 2 hours without charges. Another in 2021. A schoolteacher accused of suspicious behavior for sitting in his car too long. Holt's name appeared on every report. The final image. A grainy still from airport security. Marcus Epps, face down, eyes open, staring through the pattern of the carpet. CNN picked it up. Then MSNBC. Then the local affiliate that had once aired a hero cop profile on Holt after a public safety award. The public narrative fractured overnight. What had been dismissed as an overreaction became a story of systemic bias. A hashtag bloomed. Hashtag the gate. A reference not just to the airport, but to what the incident opened. A gate into every silent report, every buried file, every officer who'd been shielded by silence and union muscle. Marcus Epps didn't speak that morning. He didn't have to. The city was speaking for him now. In the police department's internal Slack, one officer wrote anonymously, "If this is how they're treating a Fed, how safe are the rest of us?" And in a downtown apartment, Officer Holt scrolled through the coverage with shaking hands. He thought regret was a private ache. But now it had a headline. A feed. A face. His. And the world was watching. They came for him quietly. 2 federal marshals, dressed plain but unmistakably official, knocked on the door of Holt's apartment just after noon. No sirens. No cuffs. Just presence. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. Holt opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. His badge was gone. His nameplate too. All that remained was a man stripped of uniform, rank, and myth. "You're not under arrest," the lead marshal said. "But you've been summoned." Holt didn't ask by who. He already knew. They drove him in silence, the car humming beneath the weight of things unsaid. Through the tinted glass, the city moved around them, indifferent. Children walked home from school. A woman sold bottled water on the median. A mural of George Floyd loomed large on a brick wall, eyes cast outward like a mirror. When they arrived, it wasn't to a station. It was a federal building. Clean. Cold. Designed to make even the confident feel small. They led him down a corridor. At the end, a room with no windows. Inside, Marcus Epps. Seated. Calm. No lawyer. No press. Just him. "Sit down, Officer Holt," Marcus said. "I'm not an officer anymore," Holt replied quietly. "Then sit down, Darren." He did. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was surgical. "You're not here for punishment," Marcus said. "That's coming through official channels. You're here because I want you to understand something." Holt waited. Marcus leaned forward. "I'm not just going to expose you. I'm going to expose the culture that created you. The training that praised aggression. The evaluations that skipped bias assessments. The captains who saw the complaints and filed them under typical field response. You're not a rogue officer, Darren. You're the system, working as intended." Holt said nothing, but something inside him cracked. A quiet, searing truth. It wasn't that he didn't see what he'd done. It was that, until now, he had never been forced to. The next time Officer Holt saw daylight, he wasn't wearing a uniform, he was standing on the edge of a press line, watching from the shadows. Marcus Epps was again at the podium. Behind him, a new banner, Federal Task Force on Law Enforcement Accountability. This time, he wasn't just addressing injustice. He was unveiling reform. The incident at Gate C14, Marcus began, was not isolated. It was a fracture in a much older foundation, one built on profiling, on fear masquerading as instinct, on training manuals that teach dominance before de-escalation. He paused. Cameras clicked like teeth. But out of that fracture, he continued, we are building something new. The initiative was sweeping, mandatory national bias training. Body cam footage made available within 72 hours. An independent civilian oversight board empowered with subpoena rights. and a national registry for officers with sustained misconduct, so they couldn't resign quietly and start over 2 towns away. Holt listened, stomach tight. Each bullet point felt like a eulogy for the career he once defended. And yet, it also felt like relief. For once, there was a line drawn clearly, not between him and Marcus, but between what policing had been and what it could become. When Marcus finished speaking, reporters shouted questions. One asked about forgiveness, another about justice. But it was the last question, barely audible, that stuck with Holt as he turned to leave. "Mr. Epps, would you ever sit down with the officer who cuffed you?" Marcus looked directly at the crowd. "I already did," he said, "and I told him what I'll tell you. This isn't about revenge. It's about repair." Weeks passed. In precincts across the country, posters went up, training schedules, new policy updates, a hotline for civil rights violations. But change wasn't just institutional. It was human, slow, uneven, quiet. At roll call in Holt's former precinct, a young recruit, Officer Lena Morales, stood up during a debrief. "I don't want to be part of another Gate C14, she said. "If we're taught to fear before we think, we're not serving. We're surviving. And survival isn't justice." A few officers scoffed. Others looked down. But one nodded. And that nod was enough. At DOJ headquarters, Marcus Epps moved with purpose, but not triumph. This wasn't victory. It was momentum. He kept a photo on his desk, not of the airport, but of a mural painted by local artists after the incident. It showed a black man not in chains, but in stride. Head high, arms open. Beneath it, dignity is not a threat. At home, Holt stared at the unopened envelope on his table. DOJ findings, misconduct confirmed. He had a chance to appeal, but he hadn't filed. He couldn't, because something in him had shifted. He started reading books he used to mock. The New Jim Crow, Just Mercy, case studies on bias, on history, on harm. He watched Marcus's press conferences with a notebook in hand, not because he hoped to return to duty, but because for the first time, he understood he had never really served at all. In his apartment, he turned off the news and wrote a letter, not to Marcus, not to the department, to the family of that 17-year-old from the old report, the one dismissed, the one who'd gone unnamed. "I didn't know how to see you," he wrote. "Now I do. And I'm sorry. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start." The museum exhibit was temporary, but its impact was permanent. It opened inside the Atlanta Civil Rights Center under a simple title, Gate C14. The entrance displayed looping footage from that day, not just the takedown, but the silence after, the pause, the look on Marcus Epps's face that said this wasn't new, just documented. Children came through on field trips. Teachers paused by the interactive wall labeled Assumptions. A button lit up different phrases officers had used to justify stops over the years. He looked suspicious. "She didn't comply fast enough. I felt unsafe." Visitors could press each one to see the statistics behind the phrase. Toward the back, a single item sat in a glass case, a pair of handcuffs. Beneath them, a card read. These were the cuffs placed on a man who had broken no law, posed no threat, and held the authority to prosecute the very injustice he suffered. And next to it, another card, added by Marcus himself. "We often ask Black people to forgive what hasn't been acknowledged. This exhibit is not about guilt. It's about seeing." Officer Holt never visited during opening hours. But one evening, near closing, he stepped in alone. He didn't wear sunglasses or a hat. He didn't try to hide. He stood before the cuffs for a long time. Then he sat on the bench across from them and cried. Not for himself. For the years he'd been on the other side of that glass, and never once thought to look in. The final report dropped on a Thursday. 52 pages long. Bold seal of the Department of Justice on the cover. Its title was precise. Patterns of Discriminatory Policing and Civil Rights Violations, Atlanta Precinct 6. Holt's former home. The findings were damning. Excessive use of force against Black men was 5 times higher than against white men under similar circumstances. Body cam footage had been disabled in 27 reported cases. Internal Affairs had dismissed complaints without interviews. The term non-compliant was used more often than any actual statute number. On page 38, his name appeared. Officer Darren Holt, implicated in multiple racial profiling incidents, was found to have acted outside of protocol in at least 4 documented cases. In each instance, the victims were not charged. In no instance was he disciplined. He read it twice. No one knocked on his door that day. No press. No cameras. Just a knock inside him that wouldn't stop, steady and unrelenting. Elsewhere, Marcus Epps was briefing federal agents on the next steps. Policy changes, community forums, local liaisons. But privately, he told a colleague, "It's not about making sure it never happens again. It's about making it harder for people to ignore it when it does." At night, a town hall filled with citizens, black, brown, white, all weary but watching. A mother stood up. Her son had once been stopped walking home. He still flinched when he saw a cruiser. She asked, "How do we heal?" Marcus answered, "By making truth louder than fear." In a quiet apartment, Holt sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, paper half-filled. He wasn't trying to excuse himself anymore. He was trying to testify. It was exactly 1 year after the takedown. The airport was louder than usual. Not because of travelers, but because of the people gathering at Gate C14. Not passengers. Witnesses. Journalists. Community members. And in the center, standing tall beneath a modest sign hung between two metal posts, was Marcus Epps. They had renamed it. A small plaque now sat bolted beside the gate entrance. It read, "In honor of those silenced by suspicion and those who chose to speak louder. Gate C14, where the reckoning began." Marcus didn't give a speech that day. He simply stood with the family of the teenage boy Holt had once detained without charge. The mother hugged him. The boy, now a man, stood quiet but unafraid. Far away, in a suburban meeting hall, Darren Holt was speaking to a room of young cadets. Not as a cop, as a man who had once been one. "I thought the badge gave me purpose," he said. "But purpose without reflection is just a mask for power." Some nodded. Some squirmed. All listened. He wasn't being paid. He wasn't being praised. But he was doing something he never had before, telling the truth before someone else had to. Outside, Marcus walked away from the gate. A child pointed at him. "Is that the man from the video?" he asked. His mother smiled softly. "Yes, but he's more than that. Because now he was a builder of policy, of trust, of repair. Not every officer resigned. Not every precinct reformed. But fewer complaints vanished. More body cams stayed on. More kids made it home from school without learning how to keep their hands visible and their voices small. And as for the gate, it was still an airport checkpoint. Still fluorescent. Still cold. But now, it bore witness. And that, finally, meant it could never again stay silent.